Hello, so we're going to be looking at chapter 5 in Maurizio's Classical Mythology and Context. This is going to deal with Aphrodite, Hephaestus, Ares, and Eros, or Cupid. It's primarily going to deal with Aphrodite, though. She's going to get the chief emphasis. Now, the history section is going to feature Homeric hymn number 5, another one of the longer Homeric hymns. That Homeric hymn is to Aphrodite. This section is going to suggest that myths can challenge social norms, whereas Homeric hymn number 2 to Demeter, according to Helene Foley, actually reinforces the norm of marriage. We're going to look at a very brief section from the Epic of Gilgamesh, a Mesopotamian work. We're going to look at the section where Ishtar comes on, the goddess of love in Mesopotamia, comes on to Gilgamesh. Gilgamesh rejects her. She doesn't take it well. And that, of course, sets things in motion that are going to lead to the death of Enkidu and a really strong awareness on Gilgamesh's part of his vulnerability as a mortal. And then the Nachleben section, the reception section, is going to look at the Pygmalion story, the way it has been dealt with in Hollywood films. There are 4 films that are discussed. There are a lot more films that have the Pygmalion story, though. So Aphrodite is an interesting character. She is associated with the island of Cyprus. That's where her chief shrine is, in the city of Paphos. And Cyprus is actually just off the coast of Phoenicia, modern-day Lebanon. It's also very close to modern-day Turkey. And in fact, the island of Cyprus traditionally has been divided between a Greek part of the island and a Turkish part of the island in modern times. So the thing about that is that influences from the East are going to be much stronger in the case of Aphrodite. So she's going to have much more of an Eastern flavor, a mix of Aphrodite, the Greek goddess, with the Eastern goddesses of love and sexuality. The other thing that's interesting about Aphrodite is that there are 2 Aphrodites in a way. There's the Aphrodite that's in the Theogony. That Aphrodite is born out of the sea foam. When Uranus's severed genitals are tossed into the sea, it bubbles up, she pops out, and then she sort of skates along the ocean surface, the sea surface, and ends up ultimately on the island of Cyprus. All the other authors that we have, at least all the other major authors, when they refer to Aphrodite, they refer to her as the daughter of Zeus and Dione. Now, the Hesiod Theogony Aphrodite is not the daughter of really any god, right? She comes out of the sea and the scrotal sac of Uranus, but she's not really Uranus's daughter, and she's not connected to any other figure. She's just sort of her own thing. But later authors made her the daughter of Zeus and Dione. And Dione, by the way, we don't know much about her. She does occur as like a bit character in some Greek myths, largely as Zeus' consort and the mother of Aphrodite. The name Dione is just a feminine version of the name Zeus, which means bright. There you have it. And what's the reason for that? Part of it's a way to tame Aphrodite. If we make her the daughter of Zeus, then she is sort of under Zeus's control, unlike the Aphrodite from Theogony, who is older than Zeus and has independence really from all the gods. One of the terms used of Aphrodite in the Theogony is Philomades. And that word Philomades, depending on, the sort of spelling, and of course, there was no sort of standard spelling for the Greeks, right? We have what we have. It could mean laughter loving, which is the usual translation, laughter loving Aphrodite. But it could also, the medes part, besides being laughter, could also refer to genitalia. So it could be genital loving, which of course really sort of befits a goddess of sex. Marriage and love. Marriage and love for the Greeks do not go together necessarily. It does not mean that a married couple cannot come to love one another, but marriages were marriages of convenience and marriages by arrangement. And so if there developed some sort of romantic relationship, that was fine. But the chief reason was for other reasons. Love, on the other hand, sexual love, sexual attraction, usually serves as a disruptive force because, it is, you're sort of excited, right? So the Greeks are sort of looking at like a rationality sort of based way of having relations. And of course, if you're, have the hots for someone, obviously you're not thinking rationally. Aphrodite as a figure is accompanied by, especially by sparrows, which are associated as like little lovebirds. And there are even pictures, paintings of Aphrodite in her chariot pulled by sparrows, which looks ridiculous because you get a big chariot and then, sparrows are little birds. So it's like, how exactly are the sparrows pulling this? She's also, she has a daughter with Ares, the god of war, called Harmonia, which means what it looks like, harmony. And that seems an interesting outcome of the goddess of sexual excitement and the god of war. Peitho is a goddess who is often depicted as an attendant of Aphrodite. The name means persuasion. And in Athens, Peitho was seen as an important figure because in a democratic system, the citizens have to be able to get along, right? You have to be able to persuade people because you don't have a ruler just saying this is the way it is. In a monarchy, you get a good king, things are going to run really smoothly. But the problem with that is there aren't that many good kings out there. There are a lot of like mediocre kings and some really bad kings. Democracy also can turn badly, but if the citizens get along, if they at least respect one another, then of course that can work. The Erotes is the plural of Eros. So Eros originally is a single deity. In Hesiod, it is a deity that is independent of Aphrodite, and but he follows her as an attendant. Later authors make Eros the son of Aphrodite and Ares. And that Eros is usually depicted as a toddler with wings, right? So it's a cherub with wings. Now, what happens in later art is they start using the erotes, these little Cupid figures, as decoration, and so you might end up having a painting showing like 4 or 5 erotes rather than just the single Eros as Aphrodite's son. So Aphrodite, of course, is all about sexual, excitement and the draw of sexuality, but she also has that sort of other side of persuasion and goodwill. This is a famous, this is called the Ludovisi throne. It has 3 panels, so it looks sort of like a throne. And this is the central panel, the other 2 on the side. You can sort of see sticking out, but we don't see what's on them. This shows Aphrodite coming out of the sea, being dressed by 2 of the Graces, right, who are other attendants of Aphrodite. And this particular work, there are a couple of these, and one of them is at the Boston Museum of Fine Arts. I've seen it. It's actually quite an impressive sculptural piece. Here we have Eros surrounded by erotes. So you'll notice there are like little baby erotes. There's one flying. There's one standing on the throne. There are a couple there's one sitting like on top of, coming out of a box. There's one who is sucking at the, it looks like, well, that may not be it. Yeah, it is. Who's sucking at the breast of Aphrodite sitting on her lap. So the story of the Judgment of Paris is an important one. It's the basis for the Iliad, although that story takes place far before the start of the Iliad. The Iliad only focuses on basically 2 months or so in the last year of the Trojan War. It's a story that basically shows that love and marriage do not go together necessarily, because in the usual account, sometimes they'll suggest that Paris kidnapped Helen from Menelaus. Legally, that is what happened, because adultery is having sex with a married woman who is not your wife. That is pretty much the legal definition of adultery for the Greeks. Men can have as many affairs as they want. If they have an affair with someone else's wife, then basically they're offending that guy by having sex with the guy's wife. Right? So that's the setup. So, but Helen seems to actually like Paris. I'm not so sure she likes Menelaus. I mean, she's married to him. It's a smooth marriage, relatively speaking, but they don't seem to actually be in love with one another. So the marriage here doesn't really have love. She does have a love affair, which seems to be serious on her part as well as Paris. But of course, it causes all sorts of turmoil. Now, the story, the way we have it, begins with the marriage of Peleus and Thetis. Peleus is the father of Achilles, the chief warrior at Troy on the Greek side. Peleus is a king of a town called Thea, which is in the far north of Greece. It's actually in an area called Thrace, which is separate really from Greece. Politically, it was separate at the time, but it's Greek speaking, and so in that sense, it's part of the Greek world. Peleus was one of the people who went on the Argo expedition with Jason, and Thetis is a sea goddess, and she, the word came to Zeus that a male child from Thetis would be stronger than his father. Zeus had hoped to have sex with Thetis, but when he found that out, he chose not to have that happen, and in fact, to marry her off to a mortal, so that mortal child will be stronger than the father, but will be no threat to him or the other gods. At the wedding, which was basically done with the gods are in attendance. There was a goddess who was not invited, Eris, and we saw her in the Works and Days. Right, she's the goddess of strife. So basically, her name means trouble. So if you're putting together the wedding invitations, you're not going to invite trouble. Trouble comes anyways. She's got a golden apple. On the golden apple are the words, "To the fairest." And she tosses that rather like the bouquet of flowers that gets tossed by the bride, right? And then people grab for it. 3 goddesses have a grip on the apple: Athena, Hera, and Aphrodite. They go to Zeus and say, okay, this says "to the fairest," so it has to be just one. Who's getting the apple? Zeus is not going to touch this. There's no way, this is not going to turn out well, however he chooses. So instead, he sees Paris, who is a Trojan shepherd. Now the timeline does not work right here, because Paris is still a young man when the Trojan War happens, but the wedding of Peleus and Thetis has to happen 18 years or so before the start of the Trojan War, so that's a bit of a problem with time. Just ignore that, because there's no way to solve that. It'll just hurt your brain. But he sees this prince who is at the time tending sheep, and he says that guy's gonna choose. And so the goddesses go down. They're escorted by Hermes, and he is allowed to see them naked. They are told that they cannot bear a grudge against Paris no matter how he chooses. They are also told not to try to bribe Paris. They ignore that. So Athena offers him military glory. He will be the best general ever, better than any general in all of history. He will never lose a battle. Hera says he will be the richest king in the world. And Aphrodite says, there's this woman, Helen. He chooses Aphrodite because he's not really a political figure. He's not interested in the paperwork. He's not really a warrior. I mean, he's okay. He's an archer, and he can fight. He's not like totally helpless, but he is not. He has no dreams to be a great warrior. So he then is directed by Aphrodite to go to Sparta, sort of on a trade mission. Menelaus is away from Sparta at the time. He meets Helen. He's entertained by Helen, and then he and Helen leave together. And it takes them a while to get back to Troy. It takes them a year. It's not instantaneous. They're back in Troy. But when Menelaus returns, he finds out what happened, and of course, this is a really bad thing. Paris was the guest of Menelaus. Guests don't take stuff from the host. The host offers them things which they can take as gifts. They don't just take stuff unasked, and he does that. So that's a problem. He also has taken someone else's wife. That is, of course, adultery, which is, again, sort of a problem. And Helen, when she was looking to get married, all the Greek leaders wanted to marry her, and they all came to Sparta, and she chose Menelaus for some reason, but the king of Sparta, a guy named Tyndareus, had gotten all of the suitors to swear an oath that if anything should ever happen, that the suitors would come together and support Menelaus and Helen. And so Menelaus and Agamemnon, his brother, basically call in the chit, and then everyone gets ready to go to Troy. Now, the bit about the ambivalence of Helen's role in her abduction, there's not really much ambivalence. Most of the accounts, she seems to have really wanted to go away with Paris. And any contemporary account, that's exactly what happens. Agamemnon wants a war with Troy, and so he uses this as a pretext. But Helen leaves because she feels confined, and her life is all sort of it's a boring, awful life that she has in Sparta, and so this handsome stranger from abroad comes, and of course she's happy to go with him. But there are some who will talk about like the rape of Helen, meaning that she was kidnapped. That is definitely the minority view. That is not the standard view. And if you look in the Iliad, in book 3 and 4, we've got Helen, and she clearly still has some feelings for. She feels bad about the war and this happening because of her going away with Paris, but she still seems to like Paris. I mean, she also likes Menelaus. She's not like totally hostile to him, but this is not, she's not disgusted by Paris. So, the war, of course, ends badly for Troy. And Helen goes back with Menelaus. Peitho seems to have some effect in, making that marriage work again, because after all, she's basically been living with Paris for 10 years, but more than 10 years probably, and that's going to put a strain on getting back together. In the Odyssey, we have a scene with Helen and Menelaus, and Helen has this magic drug that she pours into the wine that causes everyone to feel happy, and so there seems to be almost some sort of drug to help her smooth over her relation with Menelaus. So here we've got a red figure vase of Helen in Paris. the female figures, and in this case the rotes, the cupids, are have white skin, fair skin. Women are often depicted as having fair skin on red figure or black figure vases because they, of course, aren't out in the sun a lot of the time, so their skin would be lighter than the male. Aphrodite is connected to humor. Right? Remember, laughter-loving Aphrodite. There is a great story in Book 8 of the Odyssey, and you can actually read Book 8 of the Odyssey just by itself. It's easy to find copies of it online. At the end of Book 8, the last, I don't know, third of Book 8, Odysseus is at a banquet, and there's after dinner entertainment. The guy who is the singer is a guy named Demodocus, and he sings a song about the love triangle between Aphrodite, Ares, and Hephaestus. In some versions, Aphrodite is married to Hephaestus, but obviously she's not that crazy about Hephaestus because Hephaestus is lame. He's generally depicted as being somewhat ugly compared to the other gods, and Ares is drop dead gorgeous. So again, there's an issue there. And that love triangle pattern is a typical love triangle pattern throughout European literature. Young woman married to a successful, older, maybe not fully attractive man, and on the side she's got this handsome young guy. That's a standard trope in Western literature. What happens in this story is that Hephaestus finds out about their affair and decides to catch them in the act. Doing that, of course, would allow him to prove adultery, and therefore he could take action to get some sort of, either get a divorce or get some sort of payback, because the adulterer, if caught, has to make good to the husband in some way, usually in some monetary way. What he does when he finds out, Helios sees the couple. He goes to Hephaestus. Hephaestus then goes to his workshop and makes this net of that's so fine. It's made of metal, but it's so fine that it's invisible. And so he drapes that over the bed, so that when they hop into the bed, that'll drop down on them, and it's weighted, so when it drops down on them, they can't move. Right. So that's the setup. And that's what happens. Hephaestus is warned by Helios, the sun god, when Ares shows up. So because he pretends to go away. And so he's like halfway to the destination he said he was going to. Helios says, Ares is at your house. He rushes back. And then he's there, of course, to see them in the net. He calls the other gods, not the goddesses, just the gods, calls the other gods to look, and the other gods think it's funny, and they all laugh. Hephaestus doesn't think it's so funny, and sort of demands that Ares pay the penalty, and what that would be, I don't know, but that's what he asks. So one of Aphrodite's lovers is a mortal man named Adonis, who is a great hunter. His mother Smyrna had insulted Aphrodite or done something, where Aphrodite was upset, and then Smyrna was enticed to fall desperately in sexual desire for her father, and she basically arranges for her father to come when she in the dark, so he doesn't realize that he's sleeping with his daughter. They have sex together. She is then banished by her father, who's horrified by this, and she's pregnant. She is turned into the myrrh tree, and then out of the myrrh tree comes Adonis. So he's born out of the myrrh tree. Smyrna is actually the town. Mira is the name of the daughter. Adonis is a great hunter. He grows up in the woods. He becomes this great hunter, and he really likes hunting. He meets Aphrodite. They fall in love. They have a torrid affair. But somehow Aphrodite finds out that Adonis is going to die one day. He's going to hunt for a boar. The boar is going to gore him. So basically, the tusk is going to go right in the groin, and he's going to die. And that is what happens. She can't convince him not to go hunting, and he does die. Now, there was a festival in Athens called the Adonea, which was a festival in honor of Adonis. And part of this festival involved women planting these seeds that would quickly spring up as a plant, like it would spring up in a couple of days, and then it would shrivel like almost immediately thereafter. And this appears to be sort of sympathetic magic of women. This was a ritual for women, basically laughing about the failure of men to have staying power, right? They get hard quick, and then they get soft quick. So Aphrodite does have some important roles other than just being a goddess of sexual desire. She is important as a figure behind cities, especially the city of Athens, where her companion Peitho, which means persuasion, sort of inspires the people to agree. And that is what has to happen in any sort of democratic or type of situation. You have to. There are going to be people who disagree, but when you come to a decision, everyone has to be sort of on board. You can't have people sort of undermining the other side. That really sort of isn't the situation we currently have, but ideally that is how things are supposed to work and how things often did work. There is an Aphrodite called Aphrodite Pandemos, one of her cult titles, which means of all the people. And this, the shrine to Aphrodite Pandemos, which also had Peitho was also worshipped there, was tied to the unification of Athens. So what happened when Athens became a democracy is they reorganized the citizen body so that it wasn't based on family ties. Like it was like geographical. Think of it as like geographical wards as opposed to family ties, because family ties lead to a cycle of like revenge, right? You get these vengeance cycles, and the creators of the Athenian democracy around 500 wanted to get rid of that, so they changed the way the city was organized, and Aphrodite Pandemos is sort of the seen as overseeing that. She is also associated with ports and harbors, with the city of Corinth. Corinth was the major port city in the Greek world, and of course, sailors are often out for a good time, right? They're at the sea a lot, and when they get into shore, they're only going to be there for a few weeks, a month, maybe a couple of months, and they basically want to have their fun because then they're going to be out at sea again for an extended period. And so in Corinth, there seem to have been temple prostitutes. How that exactly worked, we don't know. They may have just had sex in ritual contexts. They may have actually been prostitutes in the employ of the temple, but regular prostitutes that you could rent for the evening. One of the titles of Aphrodite is Aphrodite Limonea, which means Aphrodite of the harbor. So this shows in sort of one other important thing. And of course, remember, she is associated with the island of Cyprus. So, there is no island that doesn't have sort of a naval component because there is no land around. Hephaestus is her husband. He's the god of metallurgy. He's the god of fire. And he's unique among the gods because of his physical infirmity. One leg is shorter than the other, or one leg got damaged. There are different versions, but the point is he moves with a limp. His upper body is really strong. He's a blacksmith. He's much more sort of working class, and not quite as elevated. In one version, Hera throws him out of Olympus because when he's born, you know, he's misshapen. He's got one leg that's short, and so she throws him out of Mount Olympus, and he lands on the island of Lemnos. And Dionysus brings him back to Olympus on a donkey, and there's a vase painting of him, and you can tell it's him because he's got an axe in his hand or a hammer in his hand. What happens when he gets there is that he makes this beautiful throne for Hera. Hera sits in the throne and she can't get out of it. It sort of like holds her and she can't get out of it. Zeus has to then make a deal with him to get Hera out of the throne, and he does what he does. He demands Aphrodite, so he gets Aphrodite as a bride if he releases Hera. There's a different story that's told in Book 1 of the Iliad of Zeus throwing Hephaestus out of Mount Olympus, where he lands. He travels for a whole day through the sky and lands on the island of Lemnos. Now, in that version, it sounds like that's the reason he's lame, and not that he was born lame, but that what happened was Zeus was having an argument with Hera. He tried to intervene to help Hera. Zeus grabbed him and then threw him out of the sky, threw him from Mount Olympus, and he landed on Lemnos. He was then taken care of by the Lemnians. Now, why the connection with Lemnos? Well, Lemnos is a volcanic island, and volcanoes, of course, are like gigantic forges, which again makes sense for a blacksmith god. There was a story about the women of Lemnos that involved a curse. The women of Lemnos had made some smart aleck comment about Aphrodite, and Aphrodite caused them to all smell. So what I'm thinking is this is some sort of like reference to menstruation, and sort of like imagine that getting to the point where it's like, we can't deal with the smell, it's too icky. And so the men basically leave and shack up with women at other islands nearby. That curse is then lifted. The women then are so angry by how they've been treated that what they do is they pretend to welcome the men back, but then all the women kill their husbands except for one woman, Hypsipyle, who is the daughter of the king. She spares her father, but the others. And then in the story of the Argonaut, when the Argonauts land on the island of Lemnos, there are just women on the island. And of course, they come on to the Argonauts, and they basically say, our men abandoned us. They left. We so need a man in our lives. And of course, the Argonauts are sailors, and so they're like, yeah, we've been at sea for months, and yeah, of course, we need some shore leave. And so there are stories about Hephaestus' skill. He makes robots that can move, so they're animated robots that can act as helpers and that sort of thing. So here we've got a satyr in the front there on the left side. I'm not sure who that little figure is holding a little star, but behind him is Dionysus, who's got the leaf crown on his head. He's also holding a pretty sizable, big gulp wine cup. And behind him is Hephaestus, who's holding some sort of instrument. Okay, so this is the return of Hephaestus to Mount Olympus. Ares is the son of Zeus and Hera. Hephaestus, in some accounts, is just the son of Hera, does not have a father, but he's sort of like a shrunken version of the monsters that Guy was able to produce. In some, he's also the son of Zeus and Hera, but Ares is always the son of Zeus and Hera. There's no indication of any other parent. He is the rage of war is what he really represents, and the gods don't really like him. He's sort of a bully, and he's sort of a complainer. So generally they don't like him. Aphrodite likes him because he really looks good. He and Aphrodite have an affair, and it's sort of like an ongoing affair. And Aphrodite produces some children, Deimos, which means terror, Phobos, which means fear, and I think those are the moons of Mars, because Mars, of course, is Aries, and Harmony, which again seems strange that the good would come out of this. The other two make some sense as the sons of Aries. Maybe Harmony is more like the patho quality of Aphrodite. He is despised by mortals and gods alike. And that's not entirely true. It says he inspired no religious devotion. He was linked to no social institutions. And I do have to say this seems to me sort of incorrect. Overall, I think that's an okay statement. But in weddings, songs, we have a bunch of wedding songs. And in the wedding songs, the bride is always compared to Aphrodite, because of course the bride is beautiful, and the groom is always compared to Ares, because he's supposed to be drop dead handsome, and presumably brave and manly and that sort of stuff. So, that's a social institution. So I would argue that, this is not entirely true. Ares also has a connection with the Amazons. The Amazons, of course, are a group of women who act more like men, and they are warriors. So here we have Ares and Aphrodite, and you can tell it's Ares because you got the helmet on, the shield, and Aphrodite here is presented as a married woman, right? This is what a married woman looks like. She's got the sort of, it's not the same as a burqa, but she's got the thing that can be sort of draped over her face, which she's sort of doing here, maybe to be coy. Eros is either Aphrodite's son or an older god than Aphrodite in Hesiod's account in the Theogony. For Hesiod, Eros is an animating creative force. This is the merge to urge, right? This is what sets things in motion. Representation as a force, as an adolescent boy, so as a teenage boy, or as a sort of toddler. The arrows of Eros can be pointed or dull. The ones that are pointed, of course, whoever gets hit with them falls in love with whatever they're looking at. If you get hit with one of the blunt arrows, which is usually made out of lead, that is going to then make you hate whatever you're looking at. And that, of course, happens in the story of Apollo and Daphne. So Aphrodite and Eros were popular with philosophers more as this sort of thing that would move people to get along, to agree, that sort of thing, rather than sort of the sex stuff. Empedocles of Sicily talks about sort of these forces of fighting, strife, and love, and of course then Ares and Aphrodite combine sort of get both of those, and that she is like an evolutionary divinity that gets things moving and gets things moving forward. Plato wrote a dialogue. Plato is a Greek philosopher. He wrote mainly dialogues. So his philosophical works most of them are dialogues. So they're like little plays. The Symposium is presented as a drinking party. That's what a symposium is, for Agathon, who was one of the Greek tragedians. We know Aeschylus because we have plays by him. We know Sophocles because we have plays by him. We know Euripides because we have a lot of plays by him. And we know of Agathon, but we don't have any plays by him. He seems to have been number 4, and when at one point they had to be careful about what works were copied and what works weren't, the 3 top guys made the cut, and Agathon sadly did not. But at any rate, the Symposium is supposed to be a drinking party in his honor because he just won first prize at the city Dionysia. So that sets it in 416 BCE, because that is the year that he won the prize. There are 5 guests, and Socrates suggests as a dinner topic, after dinner topic, while they're drinking, that they talk about eros, about desire. What is desire? Where does it come from? And Socrates is often trying to get people to define terms, right? That's really what he's mainly doing. Like, what is justice? What is love? What is good government? Those sort of things. And then that sometimes gets worked out, sometimes not, by the end of the dialogue. In the Symposium, Aristophanes, who wrote comedies, was a contemporary of Agathon. He tells a story about early humans, that early humans actually had 4 arms, 4 legs, 2 heads, and they looked like a ball with these things sticking out, and they could move really fast because what they did is they could do cartwheels with all their limbs, and they could move really fast. Somehow the gods saw them as a threat, so Zeus split them in half. He turned the genitals around so they were on the face, that they were on the same side as the face. They had been in the back, so that I guess the people could see what they were doing, but also so that each half could find his other half, right? So this is the idea of, where does sexual desire come from? It's the desire of one half to find its other half so they can be whole again. Socrates tells a different story. Socrates' story is that Eros is the son of Poros, which means prosperity, and Penia, which means poverty. And that Poros was having a birthday, and Penia, who was a goddess representing poverty, was not invited because, of course, she looked like crap. So they didn't invite her, but she snuck in anyways, and she got Poros drunk, and she basically rocked his world, got pregnant with his child, and then produced Eros. Because according to Socrates, Eros, there has to be a lack, there has to be a desire for something. So you have to feel you're lacking something that you want. If you don't feel a lack, then there's no desire because you've got it. So that's one thing. So that, and you get that in Penia. Penia is poverty. But it also has to be clever and have resources like Poros to get what it wants. And that those features come out in Eros. And then he argues that the real desire is for beauty, and beauty is not just physical. And then, of course, philosophy is itself beautiful and beauty. So therefore, this sexual desire can be seen also as a desire for beauty. So here we have a picture of Eros shown as a young man. Notice he is naked. You can see the quiver of arrows. He's got the bow and arrow. He's got the wings. And this would be sort of how Hesiod would have seen him. This is a red figure vase, so it's made around 460 BC, so it's long after Hesiod. What happens, of course, to Eros is that Eros becomes associated with the Roman god Cupid, which means the same as Eros. It means desire. The Greek god was originally sort of a young adult or teenager, and then, of course, by the Romans, he becomes more like a toddler, like a little kid. And there get to be many of them in Roman art. We have wall paintings that show like a bunch of them. And this idea of making him like this cute little toddler. The Roman word for love is amor, and amor and Cupid are sort of synonymous. So the chief point here is that Eros changes over time, right? The depiction of Eros and the way he's conceived changes over time. So here we have Eros again as a young man, bringing some, maybe his clothes. I don't know what the clothes, he's holding the clothes, he's naked, There's some weird looking creature there underneath his feet. I have no idea what that thing is supposed to be. I mean, it looks like some sort of like gigantic bug. And then there's a woman sort of sitting there who looks a bit surprised, as you might if a naked man was holding out some clothes to you. This is a Roman wall painting showing several cupids. So, right, these, and sometimes you can call these figures putti, P-U-T-T-I. They're basically cherubs, and they serve the same function. They're largely decorative. And so you've got, on the left, you've got two cupids who are making something. One's pouring liquid into a bowl. The other seems to be stirring. Maybe it's supposed to be wine, which was always mixed with water. And then I'm not sure what's going on. The other, it looks like there's one cupid sort of playing maybe a mini lyre to the female figure sitting on that throne. So Homeric hymn number 5 to Aphrodite is a funny poem. I mean, it's not like, you're probably not going to laugh your head off, but it is a humorous poem. I think you will see humor in it. The deal is that Aphrodite has the power to make every god and every mortal have sexual desire, with 3 exceptions. Athena is impervious, Hestia is impervious, Artemis is impervious, but every other deity is not impervious. And what Aphrodite likes to do, especially with the gods, is make them fall in love with mortals. She herself has never slept with a mortal at this point. And so she can go around and brag how she's better than they are because they're so weak that they fall in love with these mortal creatures. And Zeus basically has had enough. So Zeus makes her, it's not explained how he can do this, makes her fall in love with a mortal man named Anchises. Anchises is a Trojan prince. He's a cousin to the king, but he's tending sheep. So rather like Paris, he's tending sheep. Aphrodite shows up to him dressed in this like silver lame gown. It's shiny and very reflective. Moonlit night. Of course, she's a vision. He immediately thinks, uh-oh, this is a goddess. And he says to her, I'm going to build you a shrine. I'll worship. I'll sacrifice sheep. I'll do all sorts of stuff for you. But let's keep it that way. Let's keep it on a professional level. Because mortal men who have sex with a goddess generally end up impotent. It's basically the goddess has too much sexual power and it basically sucks the guy dry. So the guy's useless. He's just a husk after their sexual encounter. So he does not want that. So he says, it looks like you're a goddess or a nymph, so I'm going to build a shrine to you. I'm going to do everything that's respectful. Please don't have sex with me. And then she says, I don't know what you're talking about. I'm a mortal woman. I'm the daughter of this king who lives like a couple 100 miles away. Hermes showed up, said, you are going to be the wife of Anchises of Troy, and I'm going to take you there. And he dropped me off, just a half block away, and I walked over here to your hut, and that's why I'm here, and that's also why I'm dressed in these beautiful attire, because I'm a princess. And Anchises is like, okay, if you're mortal, like, we're doing it. And then they have sex. And of course, that's not dealt with. The next morning, Aphrodite gets up and basically reverts to her divine form, right? So sort of gives up all pretense. Anchises is passed out because of their night of lovemaking, and she basically kicks him and says, hey, do I look any different than I did last night? He sees her, realizes what has happened, and totally panics. Starts screaming like, you lied to me, you didn't tell me the truth, and make me a god or make me do something, because mortal men who have sex with a goddess, they don't have a long and fruitful life. Which basically, in other words, I don't want to be impotent is what's going on. And then she says, don't worry about it, that's not going to happen. But I am pregnant. I'm going to have a kid, the kid's going to be a boy. His name's going to be Aeneas. That's the name I've chosen. The name Aeneas basically means anguish. And the reason that she gives him that name is because she feels anguish at having slept with a mortal, because now she can't brag about it anymore, right? All the gods know, and she can't mock them anymore. So she's sort of upset about that. And she says to Anchises, but you'd better not tell anyone else about this. So when your son shows up and they're wondering, like, where did this kid come from? Because he's clearly going to look better than other human. So he's going to look like a demigod. So explain that, one of the woodland nymphs you had sex with, and then this is the child of that. If you do, tell other mortals about this, Zeus is going to zap you. And even though that did not happen in the poem, the fact that we have the story indicates that he did in fact tell, because that's how we would get the story, right? And therefore we can draw the conclusion that he does get zapped. Anchises in art is always shown as an old man who is lame. He can't walk, and he's being carried around on Aeneas' shoulder. So the theory section is from an article that a guy named Winkler wrote called "The Laughter of the Oppressed," and Winkler is writing about the Atenea, and he is suggesting that this ritual, which was primarily for women, allowed women to see themselves as the hero in the story of their sexuality, and to see men as basically these weak add-ons, right? Because male sexuality is whoop and then boop, whereas female sexuality is longer lasting, right? It doesn't have that sort of like sudden ups and downs. And at the Atenea, of course, there was this bit that I mentioned before about these plants that were planted at the beginning. It was like a 4-day festival. And then like within a day or so, these would spring up. And then like by the next day, they would have drooped. And so this represents male sexuality, that they pop up and then they droop. Ancient Greece was androcentric. It was focused on men and what men did. Men were the heroes of stories. Women were connected with the home, and that was not where stories and fame came from. So, but in this ritual, women get to be vital protagonists in their own story. In other words, the official story is that women are docile and dominated by men, but women know better. I mean, legally, yes, they are dominated, but it doesn't mean they're docile, right? They're not fools. They understand how the game's played, and they can play the game, but they have their own power. And so the question that Winkler asks a couple of times in this article is, why are the women laughing? That's the thing. Now, I will say one thing about this. I think he is right about saying that this myth this myth of Adonis, used in this particular ritual context, does challenge the social norms. Women basically get to celebrate their own power and not have to bend to to patriarchy. But it's only during the context of that ritual, because after that, it's back to the same old. And that's sort of the way, like a lot of rituals work. If you think of Mardi Gras, right? Mardi Gras is basically a blowout that you're supposed to take part in on the Tuesday, means Fat Tuesday, before Ash Wednesday. Well, what's Ash Wednesday? It's the start of Lent. And in the Middle Ages and the Renaissance in the Catholic Church world, Lent was a period where you had to deny yourselves lots of earthly pleasures. And so basically you had a blowout the weekend before, and then you had 40 days where you had to go without, or like very curtail, what you ate, how much sex you had, how much you drank. All that stuff was curtailed for 40 days. So you have a moment blowout, but that's it. So here we've got, I don't know what this actually depicts in the Adania festival, to be honest, this vase. Now the comparison section is a very short section from the Epic of Gilgamesh, which I heartily recommend that you read. It's actually a pretty interesting read. Gilgamesh is an interesting character, and the first edition had a bunch more from Gilgamesh. I mean, it had maybe a quarter of the whole poem, which I'm sorry that got cut. But here we get the scene between Ishtar and Gilgamesh. Now, Aphrodite and Ishtar and a goddess called the Queen are all sort of worshipped on Cyprus together. There are different ethnic populations, so we get a real mix here of Aphrodite, which makes her sort of a different goddess than some others. She has a lot more flavor of a Near Eastern goddess. And Ishtar or Ashtart or Inanna, they're goddesses of fertility, they're goddesses of sexuality, they're goddesses of war as well. They have a male consort who dies, right? Dumuzi, Adonis. They're connected to the sea in some way. So, and so here we've got a bejeweled female. Again, I don't know the context of this little carved figure. So the Epic of Gilgamesh tells the story of Gilgamesh, who is the king of Uruk, a city in ancient Sumeria. It's right, it's like the southernmost point of Mesopotamia. He is a proud king, and he abuses his people. He doesn't treat them well. He's sort of bored, and he sort of takes that out on his people. He basically has sex with all the women in his kingdom, which is upsetting to their husbands and their fiancés. And they pray for relief. The gods create Enkidu. He is a natural man. He basically looks like an animal, and he hangs out with the animals until he meets a temple prostitute. The temple prostitute shows him the way of civilization, sex, how to eat, how to drink, and so forth, and shaves him so that he is now this handsome young man. All the animals avoid him. He goes to beat Gilgamesh up. The two of them meet. They actually have a fight, but neither can defeat the other, and they come to respect one another, and they become best buds. Then what happens is Gilgamesh and Enkidu travel around basically fighting monsters. So instead of Gilgamesh preying on his own people, now he's actually like spreading civilization and actually doing heroic things the way you would expect. So we see this development of Gilgamesh because of his friendship with Enkidu. They kill Humbaba, who's one of the monsters. And then after that, Ishtar comes to Gilgamesh and says, "Hey, Gilgamesh, how about you and me just hop in the hay?" And Gilgamesh says, "Hey, I know about some of the people who hopped in the hay with you. One guy get turned into a rabbit. One guy get turned into so people get turned into different animals." It's like, I ain't doing any of that stuff. Ishtar then gets angry. She goes to the chief gods and basically sort of gets them to concede to give her the means to destroy Enkidu, which she does, or she caused it to happen. And then that leads to, when Enkidu dies, Gilgamesh wonders what life's all about, and he travels all around trying to find a guy named Utnapishtim, who had been the Noah in the Mesopotamian story, and he was given immortality after the flood. And so he goes, he asks him about it, and basically Utnapishtim says, it was a one-time deal. Yeah, my wife and I got immortality, but it wasn't like we've got a recipe that you can use. He says, I do have a plant, however, that you can eat. and if you eat this plant, it will make you young, and you can eat this like for decades, so you can live a very long life and be young for the time that you have it. But he loses on the boat ride home. He loses the plant. The plant falls into the sea, and a serpent comes and grabs it, and that's it. So he basically learns the lesson that I'm a hero, I'm partly divine, but I'm mortal, which means I'm going to die, and no one escapes death. So this is looks like a black basalt signet thing that you would make an impression on wax, and I can't really make this out based on the picture quality and the size. The Nachleben section, the reception section, deals with 4 films that retell the Pygmalion story. So, Pygmalion is a sculptor who lives on the island of Cyprus. The women on the island of Cyprus somehow insult Aphrodite. Aphrodite, to get revenge on the women, makes them all sex maniacs, like turns them all into, like, they have to have sex all the time. And they're basically having sex in the street, they're having sex with animals, they're having sex everywhere. Pygmalion is already sort of a prudish character, but this totally grosses him out. And so he turns away from women and says, I'm going to have nothing to do with that. But as a sculptor, he makes a statue of a woman that's beautiful, and he falls in love with the statue. And at a festival in honor of Aphrodite, he prays to Aphrodite to give him a maiden like his statue. When he goes home, the statue has become human. And they become a couple, they get married, they sort of live happily ever after, and they have a child named Paphos, who then gives his name to the main city in Cyprus. So the statue that comes to life is known as Galatea. That's her name that's given to her after she becomes a human. So all of these stories are going to deal with largely a male trying to transform a female into what the male wants, right? So it deals with men's expectations, hopes, fears about women. George Bernays wrote a play called Pygmalion in 1912 that dealt with Professor Henry Higgins and a flower seller who basically lives on the street named Eliza Doolittle. This was adapted into a musical, and that was made into a movie in the 30s called Pygmalion. In 1956, there was a Broadway musical called My Fair Lady, which was that story, but with music, which was then made into a movie in 1964. And we do have a gulf between the male hero and the female heroine. And we do have the male who sort of controls the narrative, but by the end, the woman has found her own voice, which is sort of an important thing, because Galatea doesn't have her own voice. She becomes human, but, she didn't get any lines. In the story, she doesn't get any lines. So Pygmalion gets some lines, she does not. So Higgins here, it's all about language. Higgins is a professor of language. He knows that the way the British speak determines where they go. If you can speak received pronunciation, the pronunciation they use like on the news in modern Britain, it's the pronunciation that they use in court before the Queen. If you can speak like that, you are then going to rise up the social ladder, because they're going to see you as someone who is better than the rest. If, on the other hand, you speak with a Cockney accent or a Liverpool accent or some other regional accent, they're going to see you as lower class, even if in fact you are, not. They're going to see you that way. And in the case of Eliza's case, she's a woman. She is lower class. She's poor, and she has the language problem. And Higgins is determined that he is going to teach her how to speak English correctly, to basically show that language is the determinant factor. The better you can use language, the better you're going to do in life. The movie Pretty Woman takes that same idea. Richard Gere plays a rich businessman. He needs a female escort to help, basically to be, arm candy for when he does these business meetings. But of course she has to act sort of like a lady, so she gets sort of some training in how to be a lady from the actor is Hector Elizondo, who does that. And of course, again, nothing simple, even though she is a streetwalker that Richard Gere has adopted for this purpose. One, he falls in love with her. Two, she is actually a lady and a person deserving of respect all along, but it takes a while for Richard Gere to sort of fully realize that. And in that, she is the one who ultimately sets him a test that he has to pass so that they can be together as a couple. So the Lars and the Real Girl is another film that is discussed here. Ryan Gosling plays Lars, who is a young man who something traumatic had happened to him earlier in his life, and he basically is very much an introvert. The people of the town love Lars and want to take care of him. What he does is he sends away for a blow-up doll to be his woman, right? Because he's so awkward. So again, we have him wanting to turn this blow-up doll into his girlfriend, Bianca. And of course, over the course of time, something happens he falls in love with a real woman, and then of course something has to happen to Bianca. She has to be sort of got out of the way, which with a blow-up doll is not that tough to do. I do want to mention one other movie. So the four movies are Pygmalion in the 1930s version, My Fair Lady 1964 film, Pretty Woman 1998, Lars and the Real Girl 2007. There was also a movie in the 1980s, 1983 I want to say, called Educating Rita, which also fits this. Michael Caine plays a professor at a British university, and the female character, the main female character, is a young woman who's a hairdresser, and she speaks in the local regional accent. She is not as poor as Eliza Doolittle. She's middle class, but she's lower middle class, and she decides that she wants an education. She wants to learn literature, and so she enrolls, and then in British universities you go to lectures, and then you're assigned a tutor, and the tutor will give you things to read, and then the tutor and the student meet like once a week or every couple weeks, and you discuss your reading and so forth. So it's, in some ways, it's a more personal way of doing it. You don't have classes quite like our sort of classes, and then you go to lectures to get other information. And Rita learns some important stuff. I mean, I love Educating Rita. I think it's a really wonderful. I mean, Michael Caine is great, but what happens is Michael Caine falls in love with Rita. Rita finds out soon after she starts doing the night classes and stuff, and she starts going to see this professor, that she's like losing some of her accent. She's become much more interested in like Milton and Paradise Lost than she is with the stuff that she used to be interested in, which was like going to the neighborhood pub and having a pint. But her husband, she's married, her husband, maybe she's not married, she's basically living with someone. She's in a common law marriage with this guy, and they're happy. But what happens is the family bond with the guy, and as Rita becomes more educated, she feels odd. She doesn't like going to the bar with them. She doesn't like hanging out with them. But they really like this guy, and they really like that life, and they don't want to change. So she, by taking the choices she's made, has made it sort of impossible for her to go back to that old life. But Educating Rita is much more empowering, I think, than some of the others, because Rita very much, she's sad about the loss of her old life, but she gets on with her life, and it's Michael Caine who actually sort of falls apart in the course of the story. So that's also available. One of the things you can do for extra credit is you can see one of these films and write a report on it and how it sort of reflects this Pygmalion story. Like what's the dynamic going on here? And it would be like the regular essay length, so about 2 pages, about 600 words. And you can turn it in. There's a Dropbox where you can drop 2 papers on heroes if you want. These are extra credit. Or you could do this in lieu of one of the hero papers. So it's up to you, but all of these films are worth seeing, and Educating Rita I would add to that list. And here's the poster of the film Pygmalion that starred Leslie Howard as Higgins, and Wendy, and of course he gets really top billing. He got billing even above Bernard Shaw. And then Wendy Hiller plays Eliza Doolittle.